The story I want to tell kind of coincides a bit with the 800th anniversary of the inception of the nativity scene. So credit to this is given to Saint Francis, and it is said that the first nativity scene was put together by Saint Francis as a means of helping the people, many of whom were illiterate, of better understanding the Christmas story, more vividly recognizing that story as it is recreated in front of them. This story that I'm going to tell comes later, and kind of is piggybacks on that. But it's a fascinating story that is told, a parable, and I think it's a great Advent story. My niece Katie and her brother Greg, when they were kids, now they're parents themselves, but they always liked me to tell them this story. I'm not sure why, because it's kind of a gruesome story, but I think any good story well told, we can find something compelling, and maybe the gruesomeness. Kids kind of get into a little scary stuff too once in a while. So I want to share this story. It's a bit awkward in telling it out of the blue without, it's something that might be best for a retreat or something like that, because it certainly is worthy of some further conversation. So I'm going to tell the story, but then I'd invite you to just take some time thinking about what this story might say to us, how we might connect or engage, resonate with this story in a modern era, in our communities, in our families, in our lives. And I don't want to go into any more detail than that, because I don't want to feed into what you're pondering, you're reflecting on that might bring forth. I will add, though, because I'm going to end with the end of the story, I'm going to add that a text of the story is included in the quick things, and it comes from the Taming the Wolf Institute. It's a Franciscan endeavor in peacemaking. So if you want to reflect upon the story some more, that's where you could find a link for that. So here's the story. If I could tell you a story. In 13th century Italy, there was a small city nestled in the foothills of a great mountain. It was a city of considerable beauty, and the people were justifiably proud of their village. They had piazzas with wonderful fountains, restaurants with great food, churches with beautiful spires, and government buildings with wonderful sculptures. Whenever anyone from this city traveled to Florence or Venice or Rome, their dress would stand out. For in those days, people from different places were slightly different in appearance. They wore different styles of clothing. People would say to them, "Stranger, where are you from?" And they would stand at full stature, and they would proclaim, We are from Gubbio." And that is the way they would answer, proud and defiant, and that is the way they were. Now it came to pass that one night, out of the woods on one side of Gubbio, out of the deep, dark woods of Gubbio, there came a shadow. The shadow moved through the streets of the village, going up this street, slithering down that alley, until the shadow found someone, and then it pounced. In the morning, the people of Gubbio found a mangled, gnawed body. They gathered around the remains. Many could not bear to look. "How could such a thing have happened in Gubbio?" one man asked. "It must have been a stranger, someone passing through. Who did this terrible thing?" The people nodded in agreement. It had to have been a stranger. Nevertheless, that night, the people locked their doors and stayed inside. The beautiful streets of Gubbio were empty, except for one woman. She apparently wasn't afraid or hadn't heard the news. And in the morning, they found her body mangled and gnawed like the night before. Again, the people gathered. How could this have happened? It must have been a stranger. Then an old woman spoke up. "I saw it," she said. and they all went silent. Unable to speak, the woman explained that she had looked out her window late in the night. The light of the moon allowed her to see loping down the street, blood dripping from its mouth, a wolf, a large, lean, gray wolf. That night, two men who dreamt of being heroes began stalking the streets of Gubbio, looking for the wolf that had taken up stalking their streets at night. But the wolf found them first. The next morning, the people found their bodies mangled and gnawed. Now the people of Gubbio were terrified. They gathered in the wonderful piazza in the center of the city. People were screaming and shouting, each one shouting about what they thought should be done louder than the other. For no reason, there was suddenly a moment of silence. And in that silence, a small girl spoke. She said that she'd heard of a holy man in a neighboring village that spoke to animals. Perhaps he could come here and speak to the wolf. The people laughed until an old man said he too had heard of this holy man who spoke to animals. Maybe they should approach the man, he asked. Besides, did anyone else have any better ideas? Now, the people thought they needed to decide what the holy man would tell the wolf. A committee was formed. They agreed to ask the holy man to tell the wolf to keep the commandments, especially the one against killing. Thou shalt not kill should be told to the wolf. They would ask the holy man to tell the wolf to keep the greatest commandment, the ones taught by Jesus, to love God and neighbor. And finally, they agreed. They would ask the holy man to tell the wolf to go away, to go to another village, someplace, any place other than Gubbio. And so the delegation departed. They arrived in the neighboring city and were directed to a church on the outskirts of town. They found a man in a soiled brown robe. He was kind of smelly, much younger than they'd imagined, but he seemed holy just the same, but also short. Really, they thought, much too short to be holy. But they approached the man, holy or not, smelly and short, and told him what their townsfolk had told them to tell him. The stuff about telling the wolf to keep the commandments, especially the one that says, thou shalt not kill, to keep the commandments of Jesus, of loving God and neighbor, and finally, to go away, far, far away from Gubbio. The holy man made no promises. He said that he would see what he could do. And the delegation returned to Gubbio just as the sun was setting. That night, in the blackness, the holy man walked deep into the woods. He walked and walked until finally he stopped. He knew that if he put out his hand, he would touch the wolf. He said, brother, wolf. The next morning, the people of Gubbio awoke to find the holy man standing next to the fountain. They gathered around, shouting at the holy man, wondering if he had told the wolf all the things that they told him to tell the wolf. Finally, the man raised his arm for silence. My good people of Gubbio, he proclaimed, the answer is very simple. You must feed your wolf. And with that, he walked away, leaving the exasperated, angry people of Gubbio behind. What does he mean, our wolf? This is not our wolf. We did not ask this wolf to come to Gubbio. They talked like that all through the day. And that night, as always now, they locked their doors. Later, out of the woods came the shadow. It prowled down this street and that alley, and suddenly a door opened. A hand pushed out a platter of food into the street. The shadow approached and ate the food. The next night, the same thing happened. Food pushed out into the street from a different door. And it wasn't long before every man, woman, and child in Gubbio had fed the wolf. And now, when the people of Gubbio traveled, their distinctive dress still calling attention to themselves, people would ask, "My friend, where are you from?" And they would say, "We are from Gubbio." "Gubbio," the other would say, "Gubbio. We hear you have a wolf in Gubbio." And they would smile, proud and defiant, kind of like before, only different, and say, "Yes, we have a wolf in Gubbio, and we feed our wolf." The holy man in this story, of course, is St. Francis. They say that that same year, he taught the people of Gubbio to feed their wolf. He also began the tradition of the Christmas crib and celebrating Mass around it. The legend is that many people were drawn to St. Francis and that depiction of the birth of Jesus, drawn by the animals and cows and sheep, a donkey or two. And some say that at that first Christmas crib, 800 years ago, there was also lingering off in the shadows a wolf.